candid camera. I press the button. It says we're live, but I really never believe these things, okay? Now I've got a ritual with technology. What I do, and I'm live, I should be live on YouTube also. So let me tell you what I do. I go over to my timeline, right? And I've got 2 computers now. I've got this down to a science. So
Okay.
I go over to my timeline. I've got to refresh. I had it ready, but it doesn't show yet. I've got to refresh. So now I still don't see it. That means I've got to refresh again. So now what I do is, it takes a while to refresh. Isn't that crazy? Now what I do is I click this, and now I'm going to click one more thing. We're not there yet. I'm going to click one more thing, and we did it. We did it.
Great.
Number 42. Now, there's one more thing I've got to do. Check my Twitter. I check my YouTube. We're live. I see people here. I turn down my music. And you like my music. You said that, right?
I think it's great.
It is. It's beautiful.
Here's some results from the web.
Crazy Google, right? I turn down my music and that's what happens. We are live. I'm very excited about this.
Excellent. Me too.
I know. We've been planning this now for, do you know it? We did the one about Israel. We did part 1 of this about 6 months ago. Did you know that?
Right.
And 6 months ago, maybe even 7 months ago, the world has changed so much in 7 months. And I've been pleading with you, right? I DM you a lot. I'm like, let's do number 2. And finally you gave in.
Yes. I mean, I would have loved to come on at any time, but I was waiting for all of this to shake out. I was waiting for the book to come out. So it's out, and I appreciate you very much for having me, for hosting me while I talk about it.
Are you kidding? I'm excited about this. For me, and I hope for everybody here, because I see people are joining us. So I want to thank you. I see Jedi Mac 3 is here. So I want to say thank you so much for joining us. And I see Rising Serpent, who says, and I speak several languages, and I speak them all badly. So Rising Serpent.
I don't believe that at all.
It's true. It's true. So maybe. And thank you so much for joining us. And I see Navy Austin is here with us as well. And I see you're joining us from YouTube. Do you know, I really didn't check if I'm live on YouTube. So this could be a PSYOP operation. I hope I really am live. I'm excited about this because for me, I'm a student in all these things. These are like dinners, right? Now it's dinner time. And for me, this is like we would just have dinner and I would be asking you so many questions about Qatar and about kind of the Middle East and about peace and about Israel, right? And I'm like that student in the back row. I'm that student in the back row that just kind of takes their notes but squirms away. And I let everyone else do the questions. You ever notice that? Everyone else is doing the questions. So we're going to do that again. I'm going to squirm in the back row, and I'm going to let other people say hello. And I'm going to add this. And my mic sounds perfect. Thank you, because you've been very helpful with my mic in the past, right? When I was setting up. So we are here, Dave. We made it. Exciting, right?
It's great.
It is great. It is great. And so much has changed in the world, right? And so much has changed in the Middle East, and so much has changed in Israel. So first, would you kindly, look at my camera, it's bugging out. Would you kindly spend some time just introducing yourself? Would that be all right?
Sure, absolutely. I'm just tweeting the link out.
Yeah. So you see it. It really is there, right? It makes you feel good to see it.
Yeah, it's great. It's up on YouTube in case.
Cool. Every time I see it and I know that it worked, I feel like I've crossed a finish line to something. I feel like something great has happened, and I don't trust technology. There's going to come a time. There's going to come a time, probably in like 5 years, where you and I are going to do this again. It'll be like part 5 or something. We're going to spend 2 hours doing it. You know, my things run long. And you know what's going to happen? After doing it for 2 hours, and it says live, and, you know, we see the comments and everything, it was all a PSYOP. None of it happened. It was like Mission Impossible. So
it was deep fakes?
Yeah, it could be anything. Don't trust technology.
Right.
They're trying to get you. I don't even trust that my refrigerator light is off right now. How should I know, right? So, Dave, I want you to spend a little time
Sure.
introducing yourself, and then we're going to pick up from where we left off, and we're also going to discuss in depth Qatar, because I think that's really both a good leading indicator, and sadly, it might also be a kind of a present indicator. So, would you be kind enough to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Dave Reaboi. Some of your followers know me. I guess I've spent the last couple decades obsessed with these issues as they relate to the Middle East, specifically from the point of view of kind of doctrinal Islamism and the Muslim Brotherhood movement, what they call the Islamic movement in particular. I just have a book out, which is here. I don't know if you can see it. It is called Qatar's Shadow War, and it's the Islamist Emirate and its information operations in the United States. You can buy it at my website, which is just DAVEREABOI.com.
Like that, you see that? It's scrolling at the bottom.
Beautiful. Oh my God, that's great. That's great. And when I put it together, I was asked to do it by the Center for Security Policy, where I'm a senior fellow, and I thought that it would be a kind of final statement on Qatar and the Muslim Brotherhood, and I thought it would be like nicely wrapping up this particular subject matter that has kind of occupied my time for the last. Specifically when in regards to Qatar for the last couple of years, maybe 5 years or so. And then as soon as I published it, I found that Qatar is engaging in two major information operations that kind of just started. The first one is you've got to be under a rock or not following the mainstream media not to know that the Jamal Khashoggi operation is fully engaged now in its sort of second part, which is the first part was right after he was killed, and the second part comes now with the release of what is actually kind of a phony baloney so-called classified report of the intelligence assessment of his death, of his murder. And the other info op is this new, very strange website called Rightly. And Rightly is a project of Al Jazeera, which is itself a project and a wholly owned subsidiary of the Qatari royal family. So we have Al Jazeera now creating a new product to address and to influence American conservatives. So I've got a piece coming out on that shortly, but we can talk about that as well. So that's sort of
really
that's
ready
sort
to
of
talk about that. What's the name of that magazine? What's the name of
it's called Rightly. And what Al Jazeera went and did was hire a bunch of people who worked for the Rupert Murdoch family, empire, dynasty. Some of the folks behind Heat Street, which was a Murdoch website that had Louise Mensch, of all people, as a main contributor. So it was it started, I think, in 2016, and it went nowhere. And the same team behind this are trying to do Al Jazeera's next project. I see a question coming in.
No, we're not ready for the questions.
We're not ready. Okay.
I'm just
so we'll do the questions later, and I'm happy to take any of them, of course.
It's fast. So you were talking about Rightly, though, and then you were talking about how it came from a former publication that was more right-leaning, and that had Louise Mensch, right? Is that her name? Louise Mensch.
Louise Mensch is the crazy conspiracy theorist Brit who lives in New York, who kind of made a name for herself and came to prominence, was was brought to prominence by the mainstream media and managed to build a kind of rabid anti-Trump Russia conspiracy theory following over the last couple of years. I think it's, starting in 2016, where she was claiming that I think grand marshals of the Supreme Court are coming to arrest Donald Trump, and all this. I mean, yeah.
So
yeah.
I interrupt. You know that, right?
Sure.
And,
no, I know.
There's so much to talk about, and I'm so excited to talk about this. So, rightly, can do the staff you said are old former Fox people?
I mean, some of them. I know the head of the head of the head of the new network is former Heat Street guy, but it still remains to be seen. I'm pretty sure right now they're staffing up. They have a guy named Stephen Kent, who is a kind of minor figure in DC, lobbying and PR circles, who's doing a show. But really, the bulk of their programming has kind of yet to come online. So what I was waiting to see that before I did a piece. But it's pretty straightforward. If a foreign government is building several different media outlets in the United States, several different outlets with the thought in mind of capturing several different demographics or several different political audiences in the United States, it's not doing that because it loves journalism. It's not doing that because it's bored. It's doing that because it wants to create the infrastructure required to create to conduct information operations, which is it needs a media outlet in order to push its narrative. And the way that stuff works is, we all have media that we like. We all have Twitter follows that we trust. And the more that an entity that is trying to conduct information operations is going to want to find and establish sources and voices that are credible to an audience. So, of course, what they're going to try to do is they're going to try to make this new website rightly a trusted source, really in the same way that Al Jazeera itself and AJ Plus has become a trusted source for people on the left.
Are they trusted sources?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, in 2011, Hillary Clinton told the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee that Al Jazeera is real news, and it's the it's sort of the media outlet that they love at the State Department. And I would say that Al Jazeera is responsible for for much of the Arab Spring, or to the extent that the U.S.'s involvement in the Arab Spring, sort of getting behind these revolutionary movements, opposing our traditional allies. This was all done through Al Jazeera.
So does this new publication, it's called Rightly, is that right? R-I, like a rightly.
Yes.
And does that have to disclose, is there like a RT, like Russia Times type of disclosure that's required?
Right. Well, interesting that you say that, because the National Defense Authorization from a few years ago, I think maybe from 2 years ago, made it a requirement for foreign media sources to kind of register in much the same way as lobbyists will register under foreign under FARA, under as a lobbying requirement. Thus far, Foreign Agent Registration Act. Thus far, these media outlets, including Al Jazeera, including Russia Today, have not registered. And I'm not sure.
they can register retroactively because didn't the shop that Hillary Clinton or that the DNC, the Podesta shop was doing work for Russia, and I'm going to missay this, but you'll understand the gist of it. They were doing work with Manafort, right, for Russia, and they were, I guess there's a rule that you're allowed to kind of retroactively make a FARA disclosure.
Right. No, I mean, full disclosure, I myself am registered under FARA for my work with the government of Hungary, which I haven't made a secret about, and everyone kind of is aware of that. But the FARA thing is a little bit different than this new rule in regards to media outlets, because that's sort of that falls under the FCC as opposed to FARA, which falls under the Department of Justice. So they are required by law to do this, but I guess it was up to the Trump administration to force them to do so, and they didn't. The idea that now I guess it's up to the Biden administration to force these media outlets, that are foreign-funded, foreign-controlled media outlets, to register. But that remains to be seen. I doubt that they will, though they should.
So does Rightly, and I know it's kind of early, I'm just so fascinated by this, so I'll get off Rightly in just a moment, I promise. But will these sites like Al Jazeera and I guess AJ Plus, which I'm not too familiar with, but I've seen that thing.
It exists mostly on Twitter. Yeah.
Oh, really? So do they have links into Wikipedia? Are they also somewhat trusted within that Wikipedia, the cohorts within Wikipedia?
You know what? I don't know the answer to that. I really haven't dug that up. I would say that Al Jazeera, I mean, if I would have to guess, and again, this is just my conjecture, I would guess that Al Jazeera is indeed a kind of recognized source for Wikipedia. That's just what I would say. Sort of putting it in the same category as New York Times, etc. Even though it's a state-controlled, it's a completely top-to-bottom state-controlled entity.
So I want to discuss your book so much, and I even want to discuss Blood Money, because that was all. It was news to me. Honestly, it was news to me how deeply they had infiltrated. I knew that the Chinese Communist Party had, right? Everybody kind of knows that, but I didn't realize that the floodgates were open. I thought that there was kind of a uniqueness to that. I didn't realize that there was kind of an auction house going on. So when we spoke about 7 months ago, I guess there was peace emerging between the Middle East and Israel, and there was real kind of collaborative efforts going on. So I'm very curious now how you see, and then we'll get into your book, but I'm just so curious how you see kind of Biden policies, if you've seen strong signals from Biden policy, his administration, and whatever diplomacy they've come out with. And are those peace agreements, are they kind of durable? Are they resilient? Can they withstand, an assault perhaps from the left?
Right. Yeah, I think, I mean, to answer quickly, I think that they are durable. I think, because at the end of the day, they're based on, it's not a peace agreement based on bribery or begging or anything like that. It's based on mutual self-interest between the Arab states and Israel. They all sides see benefit from it. It was perhaps the conditions were perhaps created by Barack Obama, who was such a terrible ally to them, to Israel, and to the Sunni Arabs, that they had to band together and form a united front against Iran, which was which is not just a regional threat, but a kind of global threat that affects them in particular. So it's funny. Today I was reading the latest column by Thomas Friedman in the New York Times, and he was actually talking about the Abraham Accords, and he was saying the Abraham Accords sort of plus Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia's kind of turn towards peace with Israel over the last couple of years, which coincide directly with the the time when Crown Prince MBS has gotten to the scene. So Friedman spends 70-80% of his column praising, even going as far as praising Donald Trump and Jared Kushner for getting this done, and saying how wonderful this is, and they're and just sort of how great it is, and how this sort of movement towards peace is going to kind of happen regardless. And then of course he gets to the bottom, and where he just kind of spins out into this weird kind of MBS derangement syndrome, where he is so obsessed with the idea, sort of waving the bloody Khashoggi shirt, and talking about how terrible and irresponsible and horrible MBS is. But even though he's terrible and irresponsible and horrible, he may still do some good in the region. Cool. And which I think is really funny. And I'm forgetting who said it at first, but I think it's really very apt. Which is that I think it was Tucker Carlson. I want to kind of modify it. He said that for 4 years, it was Orange Man bad, and the media was completely obsessed with hatred, consumed with hatred for Donald Trump. And now we all get to be Donald Trump, because he's left the scene, and that that hatred has to go somewhere. So it goes to his his supporters, to his voters, to the Republican Party. I would add also that hatred now is rubbing off onto world leaders, and world leaders like Viktor Orban in Hungary, like Bolsonaro in Brazil, like Bibi Netanyahu in Israel, and like MBS in Saudi Arabia. So there's a kind of MBS derangement syndrome that's certainly not new, but it's reaching kind of peak levels right now, and it's doing that primarily because the folks in the Obama/Biden administration are so hell bent on really giving away everything, giving away the store to Iran, and they're trying to destroy any forces, foreign and domestic, that are trying to prevent that.
So I got a lot of questions for you, and then I've got a lot of questions for you, and I see other people have a lot of questions for you also. So I'm gonna go through my questions because I remember them right now, right? I'm afraid I'm gonna forget them. So the first part of it was, I remember we did that Periscope, and so many people enjoyed it, and I got a lot of good DMs, as I'm sure you did. It was really informative. It was very instructive. And one of the comments that you had both agreed on was that the success of these peace agreements had a lot to do with that Jared Kushner didn't come in there with any type of, I called it legacy code, right? He didn't come in there with all the baggage of all the prior administrations and all their entanglements and all their intrigues. And he also didn't come in with a bias against Israel, because I think both of you had indicated that within the State Department, there is really embedded dynasties almost within the State Department that are really anti-Israel, and are very hostile to it.
Yeah, I mean, from the beginning, from the very, very beginning, going back to the recognition of the State of Israel by Harry Truman, the State Department, which at that time the State Department was very, very angry about that in particular, and they haven't stopped. It's funny because the State Department used to be known as a kind of haven and a den of Arabists who said, we should prefer the Arabs to the Israelis in terms of alliances. And, I disagreed with that. Many of us disagreed with that at the time, but it was actually it was a reasonable kind of realpolitik argument. What's happening now that the Israelis and the Arabs are aligning as far as interests and making peace and all this. So of course, the same group of people now have kind of run to Iran to counterbalance this. So it's very hard to think that that there's nothing. It's an anti-Israel obsession. Let's be honest. At the State Department.
So I still got those questions. They're still in my head. I'm afraid
Yeah.
to forget them. So do those forces within a State Department do they kind of reemerge now? Does that kind of legacy Clinton, Obama State Department now come back in full force and try and unwind some of those peace agreements?
Yeah, I mean, they're back in full force now. I don't think they're going to succeed in unwinding the peace agreements, but they're going to succeed in making trouble. They are, the release last week of the, or I think this week of the, time is flying, of the so-called classified report on Khashoggi, which was meant to embarrass Saudi Arabia and really to conduct a kind of regime change against the crown prince over there, a kind of non-violent regime change, diplomatically in Saudi Arabia. I mean, that was a big sign that there's a new sheriff in town, and we're going to play hardball. So there are many, many different ways that the State Department can sort of get revenge on, let's say, friends of Donald Trump, or folks or nations that have nations which have sort of bucked the globalist trend over the last several years.
So with Iran,
they'll do it.
Yeah. So with Iran. One of the things I learned, because I don't know anything about this stuff, right? I learned two things. I learned a lot of things, but I right now, front of mind, I learned two things. So you said that, and everybody agreed with you too, which I didn't know anything about this, but that Iraq has basically been kind of hollowed out and is now essentially an extension of, and I'm using the wrong words. I know that this is not the words of diplomacy or any precision, but they're essentially vassal to Iran.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways it was inevitable, because the vast majority of the population of Iraq was Shia, just like in Iran, and as many are sort of religious Shia, they take orders directly from mullahs in Iran. So, the Saddam Hussein government, the Ba'athist government in Iraq, was a Sunni government ruling over, brutally ruling over the Shia majority. So it was kind of inevitable that once you collapse Saddam, this is what you would get. You would get a sort of Iraq as vassal state of Iran.
And one of the other things I learned,
nobody thought of it though. Nobody in the kind of Bush Iraq war planning team thought about it.
Or I always wonder if, because they're such smart people, right? These are people that are very, our elites are just as good as any elites from any other time. Maybe we have an abundance of them, right? We've got a surplus of them, but that doesn't mean I like them. I don't like our elites, but do you really think that they didn't have any type of way of forecasting that this was going to happen, and perhaps they could just kind of plead kind of ignorance to it, or just kind of let people assume that there was kind of a failure?
I mean, I don't know. I wasn't there, but let's for a moment, if we play along and we say we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt, and we'll say that maybe they thought that an extended U.S. presence in the region would prevent Iran's, would kind of halt Iran's influence in Iraq. Could be. Another option Another option would be, let's say that they really kind of got high on their own supply and they thought that, hey, in a second, in very short order, the Iraqis would just say, you know what, we're going to be, a Jeffersonian democracy tomorrow, and and everything will be great, and we'll support the U.S. in its, we'll be greeted by liberators. We'll be greeted as liberators, in other words. So I don't know what the third option is. I would actually say that I really do think that that they got high on their own supply about all this, and because they were very invested in the idea of universal values, and the idea that we would go into Iraq, and then it would just come out as a sort of liberal democracy, no different than in Europe or in North America or something like that. There was a theory that took hold around the time of, it was a kind of Bernard Lewis theory, and Bernard Lewis was sort of the dean of kind of Middle East studies for a long time in the United States. And he wrote some really, really wonderful books in his youth. But his response to 9/11 was the argument that sort of bring them freedom or they'll kill us, which is that you have a sort of you have a large population of folks in the Middle East who have a kind of perverted political system, and sort of they have a terrorism is born out of the lack of freedom. That was the argument. And people like Rule Mark in the Weekly Standard and elsewhere were kind of very prominent acolytes of Bernard Lewis's in spreading this around, and it became a kind of dogma within let's say neoconservative circles at that time. So it's like terrorism is a product of lack of freedom. That was their argument, and I think that argument is bullshit. It's complete nonsense, but they believed it at the time.
So we're going to get onto that. We're going to get onto Street is Done's question in just one more, right? I've got one more thing. Okay. Is that what I learned from that discussion at Periscope, and maybe a lot of other people did, I didn't realize the Muslim Brotherhood goes so far back, and even as far back as Hitler and Nazi Germany.
Mm-hmm. It goes back further than that. It goes back to 1928 in Alexandria, Egypt, where Hassan al-Banna and the founder and several others kind of got together as a response. They wanted to do something in response to the end of the Ottoman Caliphate, because this was, for them, a kind of unqualified disaster. And they looked around and they said, you know what, the Islamic, the Ummah, the Islamic nation is not fit for another caliphate. We need to get them in, tip-top shape. And we need to do that in the same way that the first generation of Muslims were sort of, were brought into the fold and ready for, to create a new society under Muhammad. So that was the plan. That's what they set out to do at that time, and it was very much a reaction to the caliphate. And you can see, in every Muslim Brotherhood document, in every writing, is sort of the idea that that a kind of global Islamic caliphate would return, is the kind of basic point.
And we're going to get on to Street is Done's question, but I got one more, right? How is it that they wouldn't have been able to foresee kind of the Muslim Brotherhood, which already had infrastructure out there and already had the relationships and already had the marketing and the technology? They already had and the ability to recruit people really quickly. How is it that they wouldn't be able to, or that they didn't foresee the Muslim Brotherhood kind of gaining stronger footholds.
Right. Well, it's actually worse than that. I think they saw it and they liked it, because let's say your kind of theory or strategy, your strategy, your game plan for the region is, okay, after 9/11, what we're going to do is we've got these extremist Muslims over here, on the left side, and we're going to, in order to defeat those extremist Muslims, we're going to need to find moderate Muslims to support, who will fight against the extremists to prove that Islam is actually really peaceful, and these moderates are going to sort of help lead the way, because we don't have any legitimacy in this fight. We're non-Muslim, considered crusaders, so we're just sort of going to support them in their efforts. Well, the problem is, if your recipe calls for 1 part moderate Muslim or 1 part moderate group, then you need to find a moderate group, and the most let's say the group with the most credibility that could be said to be moderate. I mean, hell, they call themselves moderate. The CIA has been working with them for decades already, blah, blah, blah. The Muslim Brotherhood was that moderate group. Of course, it wasn't moderate at all. And by allying with the Muslim Brotherhood, we were actually cutting off genuine moderates at the knees. But this is what they did, because really nobody had establishment. Nobody had the infrastructure that was necessary. Nobody else did, besides the Brotherhood. So that's basically that's how we got into the situation of supporting the Brotherhood everywhere. If you're interested in this particular topic, there's an article called "Combating Political Islam" that I wrote with Kyle Scheidler for the Claremont Institute in December 2016, that kind of addresses this in more detail, as does my book.
I was just trying to get it up right now. Do you know I've become a big fan of Claremont? Did you know that?
That's great.
It is. After the conversation with Ryan, and I went through a lot of their discussions, because I already knew their book review, right? Everybody knows their book review. It's one of the great things out there. But I didn't realize all their other extraordinary things. And then we're going to go to his question, to Street is Done's question. But I've become a real fan, and now so much that you and I were even discussing Michael Anton, and we were discussing some of the people that have kind of come through that system is remarkable. They're putting a lot of really good people on. They've got like a bench system, right? Like a farm system, and they're just doing a really good job of having a farm team and then moving them up, right? It's pretty incredible. So I've talked myself kind of pale, right? I've talked myself kind of pale blue, I guess. So Street is Done has a really good question, and thank you so much for being here. And I really like the picture you have. It's a really nice picture. And I can't tell if you're making, if that's a selfie in your hand or you're making the heart symbol, but whatever it is.
That's the Van Halen sign. That's the Van Halen sign, I think.
Is that what it is? That's really cool.
No, I don't think that's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a wonderful picture. So thank you for sharing that with us. So Street is Done says, would love to hear you talk about Qatar and Al Jazeera's coverage of the war on Yemen.
So I have to plead ignorance here. I'm not familiar with Al Jazeera's coverage of the war in Yemen in Arabic. I'm not. But I am aware of their coverage in English, which in fact is a lot more important, and that's because the kind of target audience, if we want to talk about information ops, the target audience for Al Jazeera really is English, is the United States, is policymakers and folks in DC. And, of course, their coverage has been completely slanted, completely anti-Saudi, most people now who scream about Yemen have no clue how the conflict started. They've got no clue what's going on. All they know is that, they hear, oh, Saudis are bombing buses full of kids. And for someone who's been following sort of the Israel-Palestine issue for many decades, this is not unfamiliar. The things that make the headlines are, Israel responds disproportionately to attack, or a favorite one is like, SUV kills 4 pedestrians in Tel Aviv. Sort of like the third person reporting. So like the old joke was that the initial Palestinian terrorist attack was not covered by the media. They would wait until the Israeli response, and then they cover that as if there was no kind of inciting incident. So that is exactly how the Yemen war has been covered, and so it's familiar. It's like kind of classic textbook media bias from the old school, in the way things used to be. Kind of decades ago, before the advent of this totally overt, absurd bias that we have now, and really that kind of coverage spans more than just Al Jazeera. It's all over the mainstream media, but it's really led by Al Jazeera. It's led by Al Jazeera. It's led by groups like Human Rights Watch that take a lot of Qatari money, that wake up in the morning and and go after Saudi Arabia, and go after Israel, and go after Egypt, and also the Emirates. I mean, this is what it is. We when we're talking about information operations infrastructure, what we mean is that they are paying folks to wake up in the morning, and folks who are journalists or think tankers, or or kind of people creating videos and other media or social media or whatever, and their job is to go after the enemy. So, for example, their job is to just wake up and any way they can, hit the Saudis, any way they can hit the Israelis, hit the Emirates, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what you have. Nobody knows that. Nobody knows very much about the Houthis. The idea that the New York Times or the Washington Post would get would get op-eds by the Houthis, which is a complete Islamist terrorist group, and just sort of publish it as if it's as if they're legitimate freedom fighters, is insane. But this is where we are, and if very few people know what's really going on there, or have any kind of balanced view of the conflict, then you can kind of get away with this, and it's terrible.
We're going to move on a little bit, and thank you so much for that. And I see somebody spamming here, and I normally I would be very responsive to somebody if they have hostile comments, but they're just spamming. So if you have a comment that you think is significant, I'm sure Dave would be responsive to it. But spamming isn't cool, and I don't want to block you. So there's no reason to do that. And again, if you have a comment that you feel is pressing, I'm sure Dave would be happy to respond to it, right? We're all trying to engage. So Heshin Mo, thank you so much for being here. And
hey, buddy.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say hello as well. So Heshin Mo, and I'm really bad at pronouncing things. So if I'm mispronouncing your name in any way, my apologies, right? Al Jazeera is attacking some American citizens via Florida courts for exposing their lies. Yeah,
it's a really kind of terrible thing that they're doing. It's completely absurd. The Qataris, sort of led by an Al Jazeera broadcaster who's kind of virulently, both anti-Saudi and anti-Israel as well, is going after some folks who tweet in the United States, and they're trying to bankrupt these people. I mean, this is lawfare. This is just really, really kind of ugly stuff. They're alleging all kinds of conspiracies, but the process is the punishment here. It's absolutely disgusting. When when I guess as soon as the stream is over, I'm going to tweet a link to the for some background information, and some, maybe our viewers can sort of help out the folks who are under attack here, because you've got a massive unbelievably rich, the most richest wealthy per capita country in the world, Qatar, has decided, wakes up one morning and says, you know what, we're just going to smash some random Americans who are tweeting, and by and by doing so, just sort of try to destroy not only their lives but their livelihood through very costly legal means. I mean, this is what is called lawfare, and hopefully this stuff gets thrown out with prejudice. Hopefully some of these folks can recoup their legal fees. But it's a really ugly thing, and thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah, and thank you for your response to that. So Siobhan Chabria, and again, I mispronounce things. I can't help it. I speak so many languages, and I speak them so perfectly in my head, but when I get them out of there, I've got like a little bit of lisp, and I just can't do it right. So thank you so much for joining us. Asked, does Qatar have China-like aspirations for U.S. domination, or is it purely self-preservation?
No, I mean, I don't think they want to take over the United States. I think what they want to do is they want to use the United States as a weapon, or use the power of the United States as a weapon to destroy their regional adversaries. So this is what they want to do. So, for example, in sort of the most in kind of the best example really that I can think of is the Arab Spring. So in the Arab Spring, what you had the Brotherhood in Qatar using using Al Jazeera to influence the Americans to abandon their allies in the region in favor of Muslim Brotherhood governments. That's a tremendous coup. That's like getting into the OODA loop of the decision-making loop of the great world power, the great world hegemon. It's tremendously powerful, and that's I think that's what they're seeking. So if you can get for example, Libya, if you can get the United States to install an Islamist government in Libya using the American military, then what do you need a military for?
Yeah, interesting point. So I want to continue. So Jan Galt, and I like that picture. That's an interesting picture. I'm so bad at art, but it's a beautiful picture. I wish I knew who that was, right? So Jan Galt, thank you so much for joining us. Says, why is the Biden team so anti-MBS?
I think I kind of dealt with it before, which
you
is
did.
Yeah,
you did.
But I'll go through it again. Yeah, I'll go through it again. They're anti-MBS because at the very basic level, MBS is an anti-Islamist. It's because he hates the Brotherhood, and that is a cardinal sin as far as the left goes, and as far as the kind of Obama-Biden folks go, because they've thrown in with the Brotherhood, because the Brotherhood is anti-American, and it's a little more complicated than that. But that's the basic gist. MBS is anti-Islamist and anti-Iran. Most Saudi, actually all Saudi governments have been anti-Iran, but thus far there has been no Saudi government that has been sort of this this unafraid and unabashedly anti-Iran than MBS.
And I'm going to continue on with the Khashoggi thing because it's so interesting, and politics is cruel, right? Naive people shouldn't be in politics. So Rising Serpent says, who sponsored Khashoggi's visa?
I don't know. Wouldn't that be a nice thing to know?
Yeah,
If we had any Republicans, if we had any Republicans that were worth anything in Congress, we would know such things. Unfortunately, we don't. Can you imagine if it was a question that the Democrats would find benefit in answering? We'd have known the next day. We didn't even know. It took a while for us to find out that at first he was a citizen, and then he wasn't a citizen, and then he had a green card, and then he didn't have a green card, and he was a permanent resident. Blah 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 blah. I mean, we still don't know 100% what he was, but we know that he wasn't a citizen. We know that he wasn't a resident.
And we're going to continue. And I'm intrigued by it. I'm very interested because of my familiarity with China, and I certainly understand some part of the diplomacy, right? And which requires kind of me to go backfill 40 years of understanding kind of the cultural relationships that it's had and how they express it, because these things are very nuanced. So I was very interested in Khashoggi because he was a political operative, and I'm not going to make any qualitative or quantitative statement beyond saying that, because that is what it is, right? And that's not to say that there's not a lot of different agencies that are involved in these things, but certainly political operatives do get killed, and the amount of embellishment that they gave this was really exceptional, far beyond Hillary Clinton. Right after she came into office, that China disrupted a very important CIA operation, and 9 of our CIA agents were killed. So I want to continue on with Heshan. So thank you so much. And I will say that Jan Gold said it's Marie Antoinette. So now we know. That's pretty cool. You knew that?
No, I just saw it. I read it.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So Heshan says the Muslim Brotherhood now has a stronger base in the USA, Europe than it does in the Arab world.
Yeah, he's completely right. He's completely right. The base of the Muslim Brotherhood in the Arab world has been disrupted, primarily through the efforts of the Emirates and also the Saudis, the Israelis, and the big one, of course, was the Egyptians. Al-Sisi's regime kind of decapitated the Brotherhood in its birthplace in Egypt. Where they exist and where they're strong is in the West, and he's completely right. And this is the sort of second time that this has happened, that they've been wiped out within the Middle East. The first time happened in the 50s when they were ejected from Egypt. And that's when they went to Qatar. That's when they went to Saudi. That's when they went to Germany and the UK and the US. Really nothing has stopped them here in the West since then. They've managed to build institutions. They've managed to really, integrate themselves into the power structure in the West. In every possible way. I recommend reading A Mosque in Munich, which is Ian Johnson's book about the Brotherhood's entry into the West. It's fantastic.
Wow. We'll definitely include that in it. Yeah, very interesting. I definitely want to follow up with that. So has the left, do you feel that there's any type of an alignment, or there's any type of harmoniousness between the left and the Muslim Brotherhood? And I know that there's a lot of entanglements in the left and there's a lot of factions, but have you seen any type of an alignment where you can say that, there's things going on here that are unnatural?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly alignment going back with the left and all kinds of Islamist groups, specifically violent ones, going back, sort of to the very, very beginning. The left really does see the U.S. as the great Satan and Israel as the little Satan, and this is an attitude that is shared by Islamists. So it's no surprise that there is an alliance. I mean, you can go back to Carlos the Jackal, who was, a terrorist communist who ended up learning Arabic and converting to Islam and becoming becoming an Islamist as well.
Do you know, I remember when they killed him. I think he was French or something, right? I think I was in France at the time that they killed him. And I just like the name. I just remember the Jackal, the name.
Right.
And I was like, that's a kind of a cool name.
That's the other thing that I would recommend. I've recommended books so far. I really want to recommend the TV series called Carlos. That I don't know if you've seen it. It's like 5-6 hours long in several different languages, and it's very, very good. And I don't know of a better sort of cinematic illustration of the what people call the Red-Green Alliance than that film. I mean, that film sees it in action.
It's a TV series. Is that what you said? It's a TV series, or it's a movie?
Yeah, it was a TV series by it was a TV series made in Europe, and I'll post a link for it too. But it was fantastic.
You owe us a lot of links, just so you know. And
somebody should be writing it down. I'll put it I'll put it in my head. I'll forget.
And I want to follow up. So, thank you so much for being here, John Bennett. And that's a very interesting image that you've chosen. I think I've seen that maybe in like a comic strip type of thing or a graphic novel. So it's very interesting what that is. And thank you for joining us from YouTube. That's pretty cool. So John Bennett asks, are there any trusted sources that aren't compromised by various bad actors?
Let's say my answer is no. And the way to see, I mean, I think there are sources that are better than others, of course. But partly, one reason why I wrote this book, Qatar's Shadow War, and why I talk about information operations at all is because I want to hip the public to learn how to read news with discernment. And I can think of no better kind of inciting event than Russiagate and the Russia hoax to get people trained as far as how to read, with this kind of skeptical eye towards looking at the news. And when you read the news, you have to be able to break it down and say, okay, who's the writer? Who are the sources? What is it that this writer is trying to get me to believe?
So when you read that article today that you were citing, was it in the Times, and was it today? It was in the Times. I don't recall if it was in today.
I don't recall either. I just saw it on Twitter this morning.
Oh, did you? That's cool.
Yeah,
that's how I get my news too, right? And so, and you said that you felt that it was kind of an unfair assessment, right? Because they were recognizing the accomplishments of the Trump administration and kind of all those intricacies, right, complexities. And then you said at the end there was like almost a New York Times required type of disclaimer that included Khashoggi.
Yeah, it seemed like Thomas Friedman was battling a demon within himself, which is this kind of MBS and Trump derangement, and sort of trying really hard to reconcile these two things. I recommend the column. I think it's worth reading because just to kind of see that as it plays out over the course of 750, 800 words, as kind of an exercise. But no, I mean, more to the question. I would look at everything skeptically. I would say, okay, who are the interested parties? And it's not kind of conspiracy land where we get into like, okay, who's being paid to say X and who's being paid to say Y, because usually, it's sort of less complicated than that. People have a point of view. I mean, I'm very open about my point of view. We're going
to go to a clip. Yeah. I'm going to go to a clip, right? And
okay.
It's a clip from Blood Money, right? I thought it was really interesting. Yeah. And I can't say naive because I don't think of myself as naive, but I certainly was kind of surprised at the amount of infiltration that they had into our system. And I think this was kind of like the opening moments. And then we're going to get back to this because I think this is an interesting question from Ian, Angela, Ian,
Lonnie.
Is that what it is? Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's Lonnie. That's one of my favorite people in the world.
Oh, is it really? And I feel
definitely a good question.
Yeah, she is, and I really appreciate it. And we're going to get to it, but I want to take a look at this clip. And I just learned how to do all the editing, so I think it's kind of cool. This is a clip from a movie. I think Mike Cernovich produced it. Right? He's a friend, and here it is.
We've even heard about people like me. In October 2018, Wired magazine accused me and other journalists of being information terrorists. They insinuated that we were acting on behalf of foreign powers. But as an independent journalist, I've broken major stories. My reporting even forced a congressman to resign. But I've never lobbied on behalf of a foreign nation, unlike the author of that piece. After a bit of research, my team found out that the writer, Molly McHugh, is a registered foreign agent operating in the United States on behalf of the nation of Georgia and perhaps several others. Wired failed to disclose this obvious conflict of interest to their audience. Was she being paid? If so, by whom? What was her real agenda? How often does this happen? And who else is on the payroll in Washington?
So, for example, the Brookings Institution, one of the largest, oldest, most established think tanks in Washington, has accepted at least $24 million from Qatar.
Brookings is massive, literally untold millions from foreign sources. Untold because they have a U.S. branch, which is subject to American finance and donation laws, and then they have a Doha branch in Qatar, which is subject to zero. So we have absolutely no transparency into how much is pouring into that branch. WikiLeaks released kind of an amazing little cable, and the cable quoted a Qatari official claiming that Brookings is worth as much as an aircraft carrier to us.
Interesting, right? I still think about that. I think it was a very good way of expressing it, that it's worth an aircraft carrier to them. Mm-hmm. Interesting, right? Interesting way of saying it. So now we're going to get.
They said it. I didn't say it. I just,
It's amazing. It's amazing, and I like that movie. It was very helpful to me. So, can you say the name? Can you
Lonnie.
do that? Lonnie. Okay. Then I'm going to actually. Would you mind reading a question out and be responsive to it?
Sure. Could you give a breakdown of the demographics of Qatar, percentage of workers, their rights, etc.? Yes. So Qatar is the population is about 90% foreign laborers, and 10%, maybe 88, 89% foreign laborers, and just about 10% citizens, native Qataris. So they are, they're operating what could be described as a slave state or an indentured servant state, where they confiscate passports. They make it very, very difficult to leave. I've spoken to some folks who have had, actually Americans have had a very rough time over there. Even Amnesty International, sort of no friend of conservatives, has spent a lot of time documenting the human rights abuses that the Qatari state perpetrates against some of these foreign workers, and it's a kind of terrible thing.
Well, I want to understand a little bit better, because I didn't realize that they were such a big slave state, right? Mm-hmm. There's no other way of expressing it than they're a slave state, not just not just giving people their passports back. And I understand those type of things, because that's horrible as it is, but they actually have the largest slave population as a ratio to their citizenry. I mean, it's insane.
I mean, it's really crazy, and they need a lot of laborers because they're set to host the World Cup, which of course they used they used bribery through FIFA, and some of the most, it's like probably the most corrupt institution in the world is FIFA, and they greased a lot of palms, and they got that particular, they got the opportunity to host the World Cup. Of course, they've got to build all of the stadiums and all the hotels and all the infrastructure for the World Cup. So of course they need laborers, and the laborers are being held in terrible conditions. And there's a lot of good reporting, even in places like The Guardian and Amnesty, on the workers' conditions there.
But that also gives Qatar, right? I know.
Qatar.
However it is, we all know we're talking about QATAR, right? So, but it also gives them a lot of credibility, kind of as now this world force, because it was also the 2008. It was the 2008 World's Fair. It was the 2009 World's Fair. It was the 2008 Beijing Olympics, right? Mm-hmm. It was the Beijing Olympics, and that gave them a lot of authority and a lot of credibility as kind of now a world player. And then it was the World's Fair that that allowed them to kind of really be kind of a debutante's bowl for them. And I remember Hillary Clinton, as soon as she came in, so I guess this was 2010. I'm trying to remember. And America did not want to, the Bush administration did not want to participate. They did not want to set up a pavilion. They were very against it. Hillary came in, her lawyers insisted on creating a pavilion. And our pavilion was down this really dirty hill. And in Shanghai, the pavilion that was right next to China's was Iran. So it was just very, very interesting. But now Qatar is now on the world stage. I mean, when FIFA happens there, they're now a force to be reckoned with. They now have a lot more credibility.
Sure, and I believe they're also one of the major CNN global advertisers as well. Which and they'll go and they'll they spend a lot of money. I mean, it's not kind of unique to Qatar, but they certainly spend more than their fair share of sort of PR type projects and on advertising. They've got their Qatar Airways, which is again a state-owned airline that is subsidized. And for example, Qatar comes to CNN and signs a multi-million-dollar advertising agreement, and then all of a sudden you see Mehdi Hassan, the star of Al Jazeera in English, appearing on CNN. Now he's been given a show on MSNBC. So the pipeline from Al Jazeera to CNN, then to MSNBC, is quite clear with Hassan. Whether or not that has to do with the potential for investment or advertising or whatever that Qatar can make through Al Jazeera is kind of an open question, but it certainly sounds fishy.
And there's a lot of questions here, but I'm going to ask another question. So one of the things you said during the last Periscope we did with Jake Novak, where there was this kind of parallel thing about Israel and then the Middle East, was really informative. So Palestinian, whatever the ambassador is recognized as, right? I don't want to misrepresent. I don't know, but whatever that ambassador is diplomatically recognized as, was not participating, and there was also some thinking that with all these other countries now kind of pursuing alliances with Israel, that it would carry, and I don't want to misstate it, so you'll have to help me out with kind of the verbiage of this, but it'll carry, is it called Palestinian state? I'm not really sure, but it'll carry it over into an alliance, almost dragging it on its coattails. So can that happen with Qatar now?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay, so
sorry.
Yeah. So as all those Middle East countries were having alliances, were forming alliances,
right.
there were that were very intimate, right? You were talking about education, and you were talking about really unwinding the old education system and really building something new that was much more collaborative, and that the Palestinians were being excluded from that because they're still a hostile force, right?
Sure.
But then the thinking is that as all these other countries come aboard, that it kind of almost forces the Palestinians to come aboard also, because everyone else has abandoned them and now they just need to carry with the momentum. Can that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think that's the thing that. Thanks for going through that again. It's I get it now. Yeah, I think that that's at least the hope of everyone involved in the Abraham Accords and sort of the larger peace effort in the region. I mean, I've kind of long said that the UN is the great obstacle to peace in the world for many decades now, and I say that because it does not resolve it. In its nature, it does not resolve conflicts the way sort of they naturally need to be resolved, which is that one side wins and one side loses, or there's a stalemate and a kind of cold peace based on reality. It creates this kind of nonsense thing. I mean, we've got it perpetuates conflicts and sort of suspended in midair, does not let them resolve, and this is called a peace process, which is complete insanity. There would be no conflict in Israel and Palestinians. There would be no conflict if there was no UN sort of perpetuating it.
But now, is there a possibility now that, and I'm kind of worried because one of the things that you described earlier on was that it sounds like America might be losing their influence a little bit within that region if we're not if we don't continue to be kind of assertive within that peace part. They're going to just do it without us is part of your thinking, if I understand it correctly. I might have emphasized it too much though. But is it possible that Qatar could also get carried along in kind of like a Middle East momentum wave that'll?
Yeah, I don't think it will, because in the same way that kind of Syria defines itself as within the resistance, it understands itself that way. It's resistant to kind of U.S. hegemony, and it always has. Qatar is sort of the same when it comes to Saudi and Israel, and there's always going to be a divide between Saudi Arabia and Iran. It's religious, it's Shia and it's Sunni and Shia. Now, so there's always going to be a conflict there of some kind. It could be a cold peace, or it could be some degree of war or something. Mostly, it's been kind of cold peace, but it's not going to be kumbaya and everyone holding hands. And the same thing at this point. With the AKP in Turkey, and that's why we see Turkey. We've got Turkey and Saudi Arabia have traditionally been at odds, and Saudi Arabia and Iran have traditionally been at odds. Qatar and Saudi Arabia have traditionally been at odds. So you see how it kind of shakes out. The kind of system of alliances, and I don't think that general idea is going anywhere anytime soon.
You're so helpful with this. You really are. Because I told you I'm like that kid in the back row, right? And I'm taking my notes and I'm cheating a little bit off of other people's notes also because I did that. So Paul Rev, whole bunch of numbers. Thank you so much for joining us. You need a picture. Pictures are cool. Says or asks, if war breaks out between the Saudis and Iran, what is Qatar's strategy?
I think Qatar's strategy would be to try to be as helpful as possible to the U.S. to appear as helpful as possible to the U.S. while shivving Saudi Arabia. That's what I think is going to happen. I think they're going to be closer to Iran any way you slice it. They're actually vulnerable. I mean, if the Saudis are vulnerable to Iranian attack, the Qataris are very vulnerable to Iranian attack, because they're far closer. But then on the other hand, they've got the U.S. military there in Qatar to defend them, so they feel a little bit. I mean, really, at the end of the day, that's why they're emboldened. That's why all this is happening. That's why they're able to exert so much influence over the United States, is because they have our air base. We put it there once we moved in 2003. Once we moved out of Saudi Arabia, we said we need to go somewhere. The Qataris said, "Hey, we'll give you a free lease, or $1 lease in perpetuity. Just come here." And it was not an act of charity on the part of the Qataris. It was actually, really advantageous for them, because they have a base from which to conduct influence operations. And sort of it's like they have a hostage for the U.S. So every time that a U.S. administration or Congress or somebody wants to crack down on Qatari bad behavior, guess what? The DOD knocks on the door and they send some general, and the general says, Mr. President or Mr. Secretary or Senator or Congressman, I'm sorry, but we have the base there and we can't go anywhere. We can't upset the apple cart with the Qataris.
Do you expect?
Oh, I'm sorry. I have us over a barrel. No, go ahead.
I interrupt. I'll wave my hand next time, right? If war breaks out, so they're saying if war breaks out between the Saudis and Iran, what is Qatar's strategy? Do you expect there to be a war?
I really like a war as we kind of understand it, a hot war. I don't expect that. No. I mean, anything can happen. I've been wrong before, but I don't expect that. I think the war primarily will be an influence war being fought within the United States and around the region. Saudi Arabia is really not equipped to meet the Iranians on the field of battle when it comes to proxies in the Middle East. So the Iranians have Hezbollah, which is the kind of mother of all proxy militaries that's all over the place, and the Saudis just kind of have nothing like it.
Are you worried? I have so many questions. You're so interesting. Mm-hmm. So are you worried now with the Biden administration coming in, right? And I'm sure there's a lot of unknowns, and we want to be respectful to what's known and the unknown unknowns, right? Are you worried about another kind of $1.8 billion type of transfer and kind of a strengthening of Hezbollah? Is this something that now a lot of policy people say that there's going to be a lot of funds transmitted? And
sure, I mean, even before you get to funds transmitted, the idea that you have a change in administration from Trump to Biden, everybody knows that the Americans are going to be, the Americans led by Biden and his State Department and his NSC are going to be a lot more favorable to Iran than the Trump administration was. The Trump administration was very hard on Iran and its assets around the region. So that's why immediately you see these guys empowered everywhere. I mean, Hezbollah is in South America, Hezbollah is in Africa, not to mention in the Middle East. They're in the U.S. and they're in Europe. They right now really have no fear that they're going to be that their assets will be endangered by U.S. action.
That's scary. That really is. And I see Jack Holt has a comment, and we're going to go to it in a moment. But could you help me better understand this? I don't know the way the kind of the political system, kind of the people operating system works, and the distinction between the state and kind of its religion, because I'm sure they've got to kind of balance out their two interests. So Man 130, and I like that picture. Could be Tom Cruise, but it's not. It's a baby, right? It's a baby like Tom. Like, that's pretty cool.
Mhm.
Thank you so much. I like that. So Man 130 says Qatar, like Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, very much falls into the archetype of city states. What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's right in I think he's right to a great extent. I would have to kind of read up on. I'd have to think about this more. But it's a good. I mean, as kind of very small, both in territory and also in population. These, both these examples are kind of close to the old city-state model that used to be kind of ubiquitous before the age of empire. But let me think about that. But that's something definitely to ponder. I mean, my first thought is to say yes, and to agree. But yeah, let me think about that. Let's put that on the burner.
Yeah. Another note in my head, right? So Dalabati, and I recognize the name might have been different, but I recognize that that picture because I was very inquisitive about it before. Says, and help me with this, please. Qatar was a big supporter of TTP and Afghan Taliban. Do you think they are still supporting them?
Yeah, I mean, the Taliban embassy is in Qatar, in Doha.
May I just ask that you help better inform me on that? What is TTP?
I'm not even sure. I'm sorry.
Okay, gotcha. I wasn't sure if it was like a faction within them.
Yeah. Now he's gonna tell me what TTP is, and I'm gonna say, "Oh my God, I can't believe that I've forgotten." But I'm getting old. Yeah, Qatar houses the Taliban embassy in its capital in Doha, which was, I mean, they were asked to do so by the Obama administration because the Obama administration wanted to deal with the Taliban and didn't have a place to do it. TTP, Pakistani Taliban. Yeah.
Oh, that's okay. That's the same thing. She is like Googling.
Yeah. So right. So yes, I mean, supporting it monetarily, I don't know. That's a good question. I think they're being supported. They're being supported by someone, but we know that diplomatically they are being supported by the Qataris because their embassy is there. I mean, remember when Obama exchanged the deserter Bo Bergdahl for several high value.
Yeah.
Several high value Taliban guys. I mean, all of those guys were dangerous. They were from Gitmo, and they were released to the Taliban embassy in Qatar. And, they lived great lives. They were wanted by the U.S. for murder, and they lived great lives in Qatar and free lives as well.
And there's more questions about this. So I want to kind of pursue that. But first, there's an interesting question because I don't understand any of it. So help me if you do. Mm-hmm. So Ishfar Luke, thank you so much for joining us. You need a picture. How has the Visegrad Group MIDI strategies changed, developed, aligned, interest, neutral? Could you help me understand that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really good question. And it's something that I've been kind of needling states like Hungary and Poland about, which is I see that they have a lot of shared interest in the region, and I see an alliance of nationalist states, of anti-globalist states, including Brazil, including the MAGA movement in the U.S., including Hungary and Poland and Israel and Saudi and UAE. I think these are all natural allies. Thus far, I really haven't. I mean, the Visegrad Group has great relationships with Israel, but I think they should actually have better relations with the Arab states in the region, because I think there's a lot that could potentially be done there.
And I got to go backwards because I'm not sure what the Visegrad Group and Middle East strategies kind of. I'm not sure what the Visegrad Group is. Right? I don't know. So could you help me kind of understand? Go back on that a tiny bit, just so I understand kind of a framework for it.
Right. So the Visegrad Group is Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Poland in Europe.
Okay. Oh, okay. That was helpful. And when they ask about the Middle East strategies change, do they kind of work as an alliance? Is it kind of ad hoc?
I mean, they don't agree on everything, but it's but they're in reasonable agreement, and as Central European states, they kind of banded together to they're more alike than other, they're more alike, amongst themselves than some of the Western European states are. So that's they I don't know. It's a great kind of pro-America, pro-liberty group of countries.
That's very helpful. Thanks. Mm-hmm. You know so much about this stuff. I know nothing. So I'm
yeah.
I want to. Yeah, can you read out the question and just tell me what it means?
Sure. There's already been attacks on Aramco and those kinds of things, tanker wars by proxy, and pipeline sabotage. That's absolutely true. There's definitely been a lot of that stuff from Iran against Saudi for the last 2 years or so. I didn't count that as a full scale war, however, but yeah, I mean it's problematic. It was the Iranians testing how far they could go. They were actually, I think in particular those attempts from the Iranians were testing Trump and testing the U.S. Saudi alliance more than anything.
Let me ask you a crazy question, and then there's a lot of questions. I'm going to put their question up first, but I'm going to ask mine ahead of it, right? So Man 130, I'm going to ask my question first, though. Man 130 says, I spent enough time in Qatar. They're like every other Middle East country. Now I'm going to ask my question, all right? Mm-hmm. Is with the relationship between Iran improving, I guess, between the United States and Iran improving. I'm not sure if that's the right word for it, but again, I don't understand these things. Mm-hmm. But whatever the language is, right, is they were also very involved in disturbances in Afghanistan and taking in a lot of immigration from Afghanistan on a condition that they be, participants, that they be soldiers and fighters in the wars. So they would give their family a safe passage, they would pay them, and then on a condition that they actually fight on Iran's behalf in their wars over there. So
I mean, I'm not up on that story in particular.
Yeah,
but I, I mean, it sounds.
I'm familiar with it from the India side because I'm very familiar with certain things within India. So look at my camera's breaking up. That's kind of wild, right? So I do want to be responsive to their question. It's an interesting question. Med 130 says, I spent enough time in Qatar. They're like every other Middle East country.
Yeah. I mean, in many ways, someone living in Qatar would say that, life resembles life, as a private citizen living in, any other country. That could be true. I'm sure, I'm sure he's right. But it still tells us nothing about what the government is doing. It still tells us nothing about what the interests of the government, are, what the policies of the government are, and which could be terribly counterproductive. I mean, at the same time as as the U.S. fought Japan in World War II, I'm sure there were some people living in Japan that were saying, "Hey, life is pretty normal here."
So are the people in Qatar, because you did make an interesting distinction between the ruling regime, right, and the people. They're always two completely different things, and the propaganda and the marketing that a regime requires just to stay alive, right? Is there propaganda internally very anti-US, anti-Israel, or what is the marketing that they have to their own people?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I can't really answer that with much specificity. But if you say that, if we know that 90% of the population are foreign workers, from Pakistan or from Indonesia or places like that, we're only dealing with a small number of a kind of tiny population of citizens that that sort of have any say in the governing system of Qatar. And I mean, if you want to limit it even more, you can say that it's limited to those folks in the royal family. Or if you want to limit it even more, it's it's the emir, his mom, his brother, the kind of close immediate royal family who has control. So I mean, I don't know. I don't know how much it matters. I mean, it certainly doesn't matter in a way like for example, the United States. It matters because we vote on things and our population is huge, and it's and it's kind of relatively responsive. The politicians are relatively responsive to the concerns of the people. They don't always do what we want. Often they don't, but the issues that they deal with are and the issues of war and peace that traditionally the politicians have dealt with are things that that reflect the public mood and the public sentiment. So that's an issue that's a lot more kind of viable in free and open societies, big democracies. Yeah.
And somebody mentioned, and if I can find it, I'll bring it up. But they mentioned that Bahrain, from their experience, was the friendliest. I suppose in terms of its people. Has that been your experience, or have you found?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Bahrain was the most hospitable to Israel traditionally, and Bahrain was used as a Bahrain and Oman together were kind of used as kind of secret conduits for Israeli and Arab meetings that were kind of off the books traditionally before there was any kind of diplomatic recognition. So I mean, that's true. Yes.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So Jan Galt comes back, and Jan still has the same picture of Marie Antoinette, and now I feel like I'm in a museum, so I want to see some more pictures. So Jan Galt says, can you please explain why Antifa types are going to fight in Syria alongside ISIS and against Assad? And I have seen that there's been some type of interactions with them here and us there.
I'm not going to touch that one. I'm not saying that it's not a key issue. I'm just not as familiar with their particular, with that particular subculture as I should be. I could come up with, some BS reasons why that would be the case, but I'm not going to step out on a limb like that. I mean, in general, I take the position that in order for analysis to be meaningful, it's got to at least address the actor, or address the motivations of the actor as he understands them himself. So I've kind of got to dig into that and see why they're going to Syria.
So and then we're going to get to your book. There's some more questions here, and I want to get to that, but I really want to get to your book. So just so I understand, because it's an interesting question, do you worry that Qatar, as part of their kind of marketing budget, I guess, is spending money on funding these violent insurgent anarchist groups that we see in the U.S., where Jack Posobiec, right, did a lot of infiltration, right? And while he was doing them, I was DMing him and texting him about their phone equipment, because I'm very familiar with communications equipments and certain things. And they had a very complicated, very advanced architecture for their telecommunications. Not something you would see anarchists having. Expensive, requires a great deal of operational excellence, right? And so clearly there was some type of a CCP involvement, and I can say that with some authority because I'm pretty certain of it. Do you fear that Qatar is also funding these type of insurgent and anarchist group to create this social disruption here?
I think it's certainly possible. I mean, I've yet to see any concrete evidence of that. I'm not saying it's not happening, but I would never want, as an analyst, I would never want to say that I have, evidence of something happening that I just don't have.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I'm going to be doing a Periscope one day with Jack Post, because I have so many questions about even Chaz, right? Remember Chaz and Raz, the warlord of Chaz? I got a lot of questions. So, OOC, and thank you so much for joining us. And thank you also for sharing that picture of the Statue of Liberty. That's very comforting, I'm sure, to all of us. So, says Qatari media is popular among extremists and terrorists. Bin Laden was a regular guest on Al Jazeera. Does Qatari media broadcast kind of beacons out to emotionally unstable and extremist types?
Yeah, I mean, this was when, one of the great entertaining things to see is if you kind of Google Al Jazeera in Arabic versus Al Jazeera in English. And this is, I mean, sort of like Info Op 101, which is that, in Arabic they say one thing, and in English, it's in Arabic for example, they attack Saudi Arabia as being un-Islamic and anti-Islam and very liberal and sort of betraying Islamic values. But in English, they're all about progressive, social justice, and they're all about climate change and all this stuff, which is kind of catnip for leftists. To answer the question, is it popular among extremists and terrorists? I mean, the answer was yes. Bin Laden was not a regular guest on Al Jazeera, but his videos were featured prominently on Al Jazeera. There was definitely a link between Al Qaeda producers at Al Jazeera, and they made sure to broadcast his propaganda videos as soon as they got them. I mean, during the war, Don Rumsfeld said that, I think he said that he considered Al Jazeera a legitimate military target, and I don't think he's far off.
Ishfar Luke, thank you so much for being here. And they ask a question I think everybody asks, right? What is the strongest argument for outer countries, and I'll include other countries because I'm not sure, but they're the same thing, kind of, right? Remaining involved in the Middle East militarily?
Yeah, I think the strongest argument is in order to maintain the balance of power, to maintain the free flow of oil, and to make sure that that China and Russia don't come in and sort of take our place there, and sort of edge us out, especially when it comes to the natural resources in the region. China doesn't exactly have a commitment, or Russia doesn't have a commitment to the free flow of oil from the Middle East. I mean, Russia really doesn't, because they have oil themselves that they want to sell. So if Russia could decrease the flow of oil in the Middle East, the price goes up, and it becomes viable for the Russians to sell at higher prices. One of the the kind of it's become a famous story about the end of the Cold War was that Reagan was able to persuade the Saudis to increase production of oil, thereby lowering the price. The lower price of oil made it such that the Russians could not afford to, their economy just crashed because it's based on oil as well. But for the Saudis, it's much cheaper to take oil out of the ground than it is for the Russians. So at a certain price point, the Russians, below a certain price point, the Russians were just not, it was just not economically viable for them to take the oil out of the ground. So this was a kind of missing hidden ingredient for the end of the Cold War. And, and frankly, it really pissed off a lot of Texans and domestic oil manufacturers because the price was so low, and Reagan was doing it on purpose. So on one hand, he did a kind of brave thing where he said, you know what, the Cold War and winning it is more important than this temporary than this temporary thing with Texas. I'm gonna sort of make that bet, and it was a brave thing to do. Anyway, to the question, the strongest argument for our countries remaining involved in the Middle East militarily, I think, was that. I think I covered that. But I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced that it's in our best interest at this point to remain in the Middle East militarily. I think the thing to do is to make sure that our ally to sort of continue to support our allies and make sure our allies can be the sheriffs of the Middle East themselves. Make sure that they have everything that they need in order to defend themselves and in order to maintain the balance of power, and that's the thing to do, because there's no appetite in the U.S. for continued military presence in the Middle East. It's been so squandered, and really, it's not even. In my mind, if we need troops in the Middle East, okay, that's one thing to have it, but I just do not trust the current crop of military and civilian leaders to have anything like that happen. I mean, I've completely lost. I think the American people have completely lost faith in American military leadership in order, with regards to prosecuting and winning wars. It's sad, but that's where we are.
I saw during the debates, Elizabeth Warren was asked something about Afghanistan or something, and she said we shouldn't leave until there was women's rights. I think she even said gay rights, but I definitely recall her saying women's rights in Afghanistan, which is absurd. One of the things that I did appreciate from the Trump administration is that I've been hearing about peace with Israel in the Middle East since I was a little kid. I'm 54 years old. I'm talking about when I was that big, right? And it never came to fruition, right? It was always just kind of this carrot, I guess, that kept on getting further away from me. I don't know how to describe that, but like the way greyhounds chase things on the track, we always seem to be in pursuit of that. And then finally it happened, and there was no media coverage of it, and it was really obscure. There was no celebrations of it, no discussions. That's why we did a Periscope, right?
Well, it's worse than that. It's because it's the media. The media hates it. The media absolutely hates it because they wanted this on their own terms. They had a narrative. They had a script for what peace in the Middle East looked like. Peace in the Middle East looked like Israel being forced to accept concessions and kind of destroying itself on the altar of a promise of land for peace. It didn't happen. That's what they wanted. That's the script that they wanted to, that they had written already for since 1967, and it didn't happen because it became in the interest of these Arab states and in the interest of Israel to make peace. That's what it is, and we should be happy about it. We should be happy that our allies are getting along, and we should be happy that our allies have forged a détente and then finally a peace that is based on mutual self-interest, that isn't based on on us bribing them the way, for example, Jimmy Carter bribed the Egyptians to come to the table with the Israelis in the Camp David Accords. I mean, he made a sweetheart deal with Egypt and gave them money. So that's one reason why the peace deal, the Camp David peace deal in the late 70s with Israel does not look like what's going on now in UAE. I mean, did you just see? I saw a headline. Here's a question for you. How many Israeli tourists do you think visited the UAE since the Abraham Accords?
Nancy.
Yeah.
Guess. Nancy. I'm going to have Nancy guess.
How many tourists? Say again?
Dave is going to repeat the question. Dave, would you be kind enough to repeat the question?
Sure. How many, since the Abraham Accords happened, I guess late summer, early fall of 2020, how many Israeli tourists visited Dubai and Abu Dhabi in the Emirates?
Everybody guess, not just Nancy. Everybody guess. This is I normally hate these games. This is a really interesting one. Nancy.
I'm going to say it's I'm going to say it's low.
Okay, just give us a number though. That's not
Just
a number.
how many?
Yes.
300.
Nancy says 300. You're horrible at this game. So we have guests. We have guests here, and I really want to take a look at them because it's interesting. So Rising Serpent says hundreds of thousands. Don't say anything, Dave. May 130 says 50,000. Ishfer Luke says, what a beautiful picture you shared with us. That's a beautiful picture. Is that a jazz person, by the way, Dave? Because you're the jazz guy.
I don't know.
What a beautiful picture. So Ishvar Luke says 3,000. And then they say, now what's your favorite Israeli music? We'll get to that in a moment. And Lawnmower Choke says 2 million. So there's a bunch of others. Nancy, you're not allowed to cheat. But with that being said, Allison Rogers. Okay, hold on, because this is really interesting. Allison Rogers says 1 million. Thank you so much for joining us, Allison. You need to get a picture. Pictures are cool. And Arab Bit or Duck, and I recognize that picture, so thank you so much for joining us, says 250,000. So we've got a lot of guesses here, and there's a lot more that I'm not going to go through right now because it's a long list. But with that being said, I wish I could put the question on the screen. With that being said, and I'll guess. Now I'll guess. I'm going to go with 50,000. So I'll go with May 130. I'll go with this one.
Okay. Now keep in mind that Israel is 7 million people, and the Emirates are almost about 10 million people. So the idea of, and also throw COVID in there because this is the time of COVID and lockdowns and everything. So anyway, the number is still mind-blowing. It's about 110 to 130,000.
That is incredible.
Which is incredible. At a time of COVID lockdowns, more than 100,000 Israelis have said, you know what, we're going to go on a holiday to Dubai. And, where Israeli passports were not valid until very, very, very recently. So that's a crazy thing. You can buy Israeli wine in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, which is nuts considering it's still an Islamic country where, where they don't really drink wine. So I see people are reacting.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I'm 54. I've been hearing about this for a long time. And you were very strong. You and Jake were very strong on. You're saying, listen, this is a big deal, and firm on it. And then I was getting a lot of DMs because I try to disengage emotion. Everybody knows that.
Sure.
And everybody was like, Adam, they're right. This is a very real type of thing. It was a real accomplishment. They have right to to celebrate it. I don't know what the right word is. Just kind of they have the right to celebrate it and attribute it to Trump and attribute it to all the accomplishments of that administration, what they did. So the other thing that I've heard about since I'm 54, so since 2001, was we're going to get out of Iraq, we're going to get out of Afghanistan. I remember all of that. You're a little bit younger. You're like 43, right? How old are you?
43. Yep.
I'm good at this game. So you don't remember it like I remember it. If people
Right.
here are in their 50s, tell me if you remember it. All the lies we heard. Mushroom clouds, the whole thing. It was craziness. It was like it was today. It really was like it was today, but it was a smaller universe. But everywhere you go, people were saying about Iraq, right? We got to blow them up, and the truth didn't matter anymore. So the other thing I've been waiting for is for us to get out of Iraq and Afghanistan. So here is an interesting question. And I want to thank, it's a bunch of numbers, and I'm going to say them in case there's some type of significance to them. 12, 16, 70, 71, 5. Thank you so much for joining us. And odd picture, I'm not sure. I can't
It's
tell.
Chewbacca.
Is it? And is that
Yeah.
like the Bitcoin eyes that it's got, like the Bitcoin type of eyes? So
Yeah.
that's cool. So so they ask they're also commenting, our so-called leadership seems to have been deliberately destabilizing the Middle East by empowering Iran. Is that what's occurring right now? Is there actually the kind of a leading indicator for destabilizing the region?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, just as a very simple answer, I think that's exactly it. My buddy Mike Duran had a great piece, a really good essential reading piece from 2015 called Obama's Secret Iran Strategy, and in which he lays out a lot of this. This was obviously right before the Iran deal, we're kind of in the midst of the Iran deal, sort of trying to explain to the American people what's going on, because kind of uniquely the Obama administration was really opaque about their motivations for this, and what they said and what they were thinking were kind of two separate things. But Duran was able to go and sort of piece together what they really meant in this piece. It's in Mosaic, so if you look up Duran and Secret Iran Strategy, you'll see it.
No, you owe it to us. You owe it to us. And we're going to get to your book in a moment. Important question, though. Rising Serpent, thank you so much for joining us. And I love that picture as well. Namaste. Says, what's Qatar's motivation for funding educational institutions in the United States?
Well, it's their motivation is the same motivation for China funding educational institutions in the United States. I mean, this is an influence operation. We have influence operations and we have information operations. Mostly in the book, I talked about information, but we also have influence. And they're kind of, obviously they're related in the sense of intention of what what let's say Qatar is trying to achieve, which is things that are its national interest, but they're conducted differently. So, for example, by funding educational institutions, Qatar is able to control the Middle East departments in a lot of colleges and universities. I mean, that's a big deal. And actually, Qatar is they spend the most money in the funding U.S. educational institutions in the United States, which is a kind of crazy thing to imagine. Here is a very, very tiny country allied with the Muslim Brotherhood and Islamists, and they're funding primary schools and middle schools and and colleges and universities to the tunes of billions of dollars. And that's not even counting the campuses that they will set up inside Qatar itself, and inside what they call Education City in Doha. So like they'll go and they'll say Northwestern University, New York University, Texas A&M will build a campus for you in Doha where we can staff it with your teachers. You can get your students to spend a year or a semester or whatever in our country. And what ends up happening is it's the same thing as us hosting the airbase. It becomes a tool of leverage to be used against us, and that's what they have in mind.
I will say there is a difference with the Chinese Communist Party, with them funding the Confucius Institutes, and them funding. They fund a lot of retired politicians. That's really one of their big gigs, is to give them kind of consulting things. But their ambitions are much different. They want to control the diaspora, right? Because they don't want any of the Western influences coming back to China. They're extremely resistant. So one of the things they do is to just have kind of those education centers, and the Confucius centers are basically little embassies. That's really the way you have to think of them. They're really just little embassies. And another thing they do is they recruit spies out of them. So while as Qatar might get some type of cooperation with people that have treachery, right? Because these things happen. While as the Chinese Communist Party, because they have so many academics and they have so many Chinese students learning overseas here and getting advanced degrees, they use the Confucius Center as this kind of great repository for them for collecting their information and then sending it back out. So it's a much more formalized spy network.
Right.
And also that something controls. So I think it's probably a lot more mature. But China has they've got some great overseas students here, right? We all know that.
Yes.
They just want to make sure that those overseas students are coerced to both keep quiet and not return with any, not be a part of a diaspora that's not going to cooperate with the Chinese Communist Party. We're going to talk about your book.
Sure. No. I think that's right. I think that's right. Probably it's a function of the population, right? China has a huge population. Qatar has a very tiny one. So we're not talking about Qatari students in U.S. universities. We're talking about kind of, let's say, more traditional. We're not talking about espionage as much as we're talking about influence. For that reason.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. And Man 130 says brain overload, which is I think the same way, because there's so much. I rewatch a lot of these because I'm missing so much of the information that's occurring. So I see that I'm going to get back to I see some really interesting questions, but I'm not going to get to them yet because I want to talk about your book. So now we're going to go here. And now I'm going to scroll up. You can't see what I'm doing over here. Nobody can. I've got like a whole type of thing over here. I'm like at the helm of the Enterprise. There's so much going on here. It's exciting. We're going to talk about your book, right? So here is your book. Yeah. And while I'm going to get rid of that thing, right? So now we're going to talk about it unmolested. There we go. You see that? You told me that you were going to write a book months ago, that you were going to write 2 books. Right? You told me you were going to write 2 books.
Yeah. So it was actually initially going to be 1 book and then 2 books. And then finally I just scrapped the other one. The other book was, what I wanted to do was I wanted to compare Qatari information operations to the Russia hoax and the mechanics of that. And I did. And I wrote a whole section. I mean, I probably wrote another book length section that dealt with the Russia hoax. But by the time I had it kind of ready for publication, so many of my friends had put out great books on the Russia hoax, and I figured that it was sort of overtaken by events. Number one, and number two is there just wasn't really a nice way of weaving the two together, because you know, I mean, as you know, a book is like a book is sequential. Sure, you can skip around from one chapter to another, but you really have to lay the chapters out, in a logical order. And I just didn't, putting these two things together, it was a better idea than it seemed in real life. So
Did
that
you
was
know-
the book.
I'm sorry. Did you know you were going to write the book when you were joined with Blood Money, or was this something where you just decided?
No. It was this summer. The Center for Security Policy asked me to write this, and I said, yeah, I've got, I've probably written more about Qatar's information operations than anyone over the last several years. It would be good for all of this information to be collected in a book, and really the Russia story, the Russiagate story, kind of made me more aware of the need to define and talk about what information operations really are, because a lot of this terminology over the last couple of years, it's been assaulting everyone from the news media. Everyone's been, using the jargon, and so I wanted to take some time to kind of talk through it. And there's a section at the end where I've got to, where I've got to talk about sort of policy suggestions for going forward, what we can do. And of course, the natural policy suggestion is, be aware of Qatar, be aware of the Muslim Brotherhood, and recognize that it is not in our interest to to ally with this movement or this country. So that's pretty straightforward. But the larger issue of how do you defend the United States against information operations? I mean, the short answer is you don't. We live in a free society. On one hand, you have our susceptibility to information operations by all kinds of foreign and domestic actors. And on the other hand, you have freedom. And if you have freedom, you necessarily become susceptible to, bad actors doing bad things. It's the same thing as hate speech or any of that, any of that stuff. You've got to take the bad with the good. And in this case, freedom is much better than the alternative. So how do we fight against information operations in a context of information freedom or free speech? Well, we have to be wise to it, and we have to do things like I do, which is talk about how this stuff works and try to get people aware of sort of decoding the messages that are sent to us in media and what the motivations of the people sending those messages are. Unfortunately, though, we're in a place in America now where it's a mainstream left-wing opinion, let's say even a mainstream liberal opinion, to want to, destroy free speech in order to stop what they call disinformation and foreign information operations. They're very happy to shut down the First Amendment in order to crush dissent or in order to crush their political opponents. So, I mean, where we go from there is kind of, as I said in the book, is kind of an open question. I don't think the society can survive at all in any form that's worth anything if we don't have that freedom to dissent.
So I didn't read your book in advance, so I had to order it, right? I had to order it like everybody else, which is kind of cool. So can Qatar be contained? At what point does it become an existential threat?
I mean, maybe to calibrate those words better. Is it an existential threat now? I mean, what does existential mean? Does it mean a nuclear threat? Does it mean, a threat like China? I mean, no, it'll never be a threat like that. But it is a threat in terms of its information and influence operations get us to do things that are not in our best interest to do. So to the extent that we can stop that, it's all to the better.
Well, so when I think of existential, I don't necessarily think about it just in terms of Chinese Communist Party, because the checkbook is a lot larger, and the mechanisms that they employ are much different, United Front and such. But when I think of existential, I think how much intrusion and infiltration have they made into our political apparatus, and can it be extricated? Is there a way of pulling it out? Chinese Communist Party, at some point, we have to just be tolerant of, because we are an open system. It just is what it is, and it's unfortunate. But Qatar, there seems to be like an impermanence to some of these Middle East relationships. So, is this something that can kind of be pulled out?
Yeah, I think there's one thing that could be a kind of silver bullet solution to a lot of this. And if we ever get a president that says, you know what, I'm just going to move the airbase to Abu Dhabi. The Emiratis have already said, hey, we'll even pay to move you guys if you want to move. And to take the military to a place that is kind of more secure and more aligned with our interest in many ways. And if that happens, then the whole house of cards falls. Because right now, the biggest asset that they have, frankly, at all, is the U.S. military going to bat for Qatar at every turn.
So if Americans were to kind of demand that the base be moved, what is the propaganda and the rhetoric that we would hear as kind of resistance to not allowing it to move?
They would say, oh, it's expensive. Oh, it's expensive. It's a pain in the ass. It's this and that. It's, we just moved a few years, we just moved 20 years ago. That's what they would say. And of course, then the Qataris would say, if there was a serious effort to study this or to actually move the base, obviously the Qataris would call in every possible favor, and you'd have every general that's still alive come up and write letters and brief members of Congress and try to make this not happen. So they'd call in every possible favor. So it's a huge undertaking. This is like, in many ways, this is why it's just completely unlikely that we will get an administration that is motivated to do this and also competent to see it through. And a president has to be competent and really desirous of this particular outcome for it to happen.
So so the Chinese Communist Party during the kind of trade wars, which people don't give recognition to the fact of how much we won that. And I knew that China's only response was going to be propaganda, right? I knew they were going to put the pedal to the metal, and perhaps they've employed more drastic measures, but I knew that was going to happen. But they were spending a lot of money advertising in our press. They would advertise in Vox, they would advertise in BuzzFeed, and then they were advertising in the agricultural in the middle of the country. So when I see Khashoggi and now I see Yemen, I think of that as essentially Qatar advertising. Is that the way you think of it?
Yes, 100%. And as when these guys do advertising, it's not. It's a legal bribe, right? It's not the advertising itself. They don't care if somebody, if the Qataris or the Chinese decide to buy a full page, or buy an insert into the New York Times or the Washington Post or something like that. It has nothing to do with, they don't care that much about about who sees it in print. The fact of the matter is they shoveled money into the coffers of the media outlet. You know, I mean, they don't care. You know, they don't even care if it runs. You know, that was their opportunity to do that, and that was our opportunity to, you know, give a little schmear to to the outlet. So yeah, I think that's exactly what happens.
I know a lot of the rhetoric that's used by the Chinese Communist Party. I know what they hate progressives, right? It's just their nature is there's kind of a firmness to their own kind of constitution, and they're very anti-progressive. They're anti-woke. I mean, there's just a lot to it, and there's a lot of complexity to it. So I don't want to just be unfair in any way and just abbreviate it. But nevertheless, I know the language that they're going to use. They're going to use progressive a lot. This is not a new term for them. The way they use progressive. So I know kind of the way words are collapsed with them. You know, I can, as soon as I hear a politician saying it, I know exactly the source of it, and I can tell you where it's been from. Are there key words and sentences that that you see kind of circulated around that you know are part of a campaign of propaganda?
Yeah, I mean, let me think.
It's
I mean,
interesting.
anytime you have people talking about you know, Yemen and human rights abuses, that's hey, let's stick it to the Saudis. Anytime you have people talking about, you know, MBS and Khashoggi, that's, hey, let's stick it to the Saudis. In the same way that, you know, similar things with Israel. You know, for example, you know, anytime the media was talking about anytime the U.S. media is talking about you know, income inequality and the legacy of slavery, you know, that's like a kind of left wing. You know, that's like a you know, a kind of left wing bird call or duck call or something. That you know, it's sort of a term that encapsulates the whole argument without having to have the argument.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I got another question, because I'm so curious about this stuff. Do we advertise? Are they closed to our soft power over there? So, for example, in China, we're not, you know, Twitter and you know, our social media doesn't exist over there, right? But theirs exist over here, right? But you know, they're closed, and there's no way that a Western country can actually exert soft power. Just it's absurd to say it. At least none that's cohesive, right? Maybe a couple of people saying this, holding a sign, but certainly nothing cohesive. In Qatar, is it closed? Is there any soft power that you've seen that we have over there?
If we decide to use it, for example, if we decided, you know, you know, we have, if we flip, for example, if we flip the air base on them and we said, okay, now in order for us not to move the base, you know, you're going to need to do X, Y, and Z. You know, in order for us to continue, you know, I mean, we sort of have a protection agreement with them. Because we have our base there. We're not going to let them be invaded or taken over because we've got our base there. And it's interesting actually about Qatar and this kind of thing, because in the history of Qatar is that it makes sort of two different types of deals with two different types of powers sort of consistently. So prior to it being, you know, what could be called an American protectorate in terms of you know, the kind of property of the U.S. military, just because of the airbase, it had a similar relationship to the U.K. So it was tied for the last, you know, 100 years or so, or, you know, prior to the UK. And they had a they had a port there. And the other relationship is the kind of ideological legitimacy relationship. And that is the Brotherhood right now. That is, it kind of the emblematic, it's sort of like that, the relationship between the Brotherhood and the Qatari royal family is sort of contained within Yusuf al-Qaradawi, who's like the chief jurist of the Brotherhood, who has lived in Doha for many decades, and is responsible for setting up the system of the system of Islamic education and institutions there in Qatar, with a Brotherhood bent. And prior to that relationship with the Brotherhood, not a lot of people know, they talk about the Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia, but the Wahhabis also were embraced by the Qataris. So the Qataris are also, Wahhabis, but sort of not like we understand the term. So prior to the embrace of the Brotherhood, they had embraced the Wahhabis for sort of political, religio-political legitimacy in the region. And, in many ways, this, I'm not kind of blaming them for these types of relationships, because it's not uncommon for a small country surrounded by larger countries and larger powers to create this system of alliances. It's really natural for them to do so, but it kind of behooves us to understand the lineage and how these relationships interact and why they're meaningful.
So do we have any pro-America? And I'm going to get to the book again because I see Rising Serpent, and thank you so much. But I'm just so interested in all this, right? You're so good at it. So do we have like pro-American propaganda that we're distributing within Qatar?
Do we have pro-American propaganda that we're distributing within the United States? I don't think so. And this is not in the book, but in my personal opinion, I think we're an empire or a republic in decline. I think the sell-by date is over. And we're at a point where we have no common agreement on, any of the foundational principles that undergird the regime. So in that type of situation, sort of by definition, you can't have pro-American propaganda. I mean, what is pro-American propaganda today under a Biden government? Is it like, LGBT propaganda in Pakistan? Does it take the form of, critical race theory? What really is, pro-American propaganda? Because what really is America? We're at this point now, and it's a heavy thing to think about, but it's true, and all of these, sort of all of the, let's say, the traditional way that we used to view foreign policy and we used to view the region, I think is kind of overtaken by events. And this is a crisis that I've been thinking through and trying to kind of deal with for a number of years, because I've been in this space. It used to be really easy to say or define what is something that's pro-America, in the before times. Now it's not so simple. In a world of, critical race theory, in a world of woke capital, what is pro-America? And which America are we talking about? And these are questions that are larger than Qatar. These are questions that are larger than, China. It goes directly to who we are. I think the great, it's kind of an admission against interest on a stream here where we're talking about kind of national security and foreign policy issues. But the top issue that we need to be talking about is the state of our disunion because it is impossible to have a foreign policy or a domestic policy if you don't know who you are, and if you hate your fellow citizens more than you hate a foreign enemy country.
You're right. That's a lot to take in. And I'll tell you, interesting story is a very good friend of Nancy and myself. Her family, well, she's from Pakistan. Her family's from Pakistan, and we love her so much. And she just cooks us such great food. So we go over there, and she has a big family. And I ask her father, I'm like, who is America's greatest actor? Right? I'm actually going around the table. I'm going around.
I know your answer. I know your answer.
Oh, it's very interesting. So I'm going around the table, right? I go to Z. I say, Z, who's your favorite actor? He's too young. He doesn't know anything. But I made him say Tom Cruise anyway. But so then I go to A. A, who's your favorite actor? I think he actually already said Tom Cruise because he heard his brother, right? It's like little cues. Mm-hmm. I ask, Fudja. And honestly, he's probably playing with a doll or something. So then this is very interesting. I ask the father, and he's been sick. So our thoughts have to be with him, right? He has been sick. I ask her father, I'm like, who is America's greatest actor? This is very interesting. When he was living in Pakistan, you know what his vision of America was? Clark Gable. That was America to him.
Right.
And that was America to him. People have this thing with Tom Cruise, but Tom Cruise is one of the few things that's still where you can say Tom Cruise is America. Elon Musk is America, right? Elon Musk is the American story. Tom Cruise is the American story. Tom Cruise has had an enduring career. He's kept himself out of a lot of messes. He jumps on couches, right? Who doesn't jump on a couch every now and then? But nevertheless, he said growing up, for him, it was Clark Gable. That was his vision of America. So for him, the first answer he gave was Clark Gable. And then I said, no, America's greatest living actor. And he said, unsolicited, with no physical coercion, right? There's no threats involved. He said, Tom Cruise. I was happy about that. And we can't have a domestic policy and we can't have a foreign policy. You're right. Until we figure out who we are as a country, right? And I think that I'm very optimistic on America. I just think it's going to be a different people operating system. I think we're looking at the founding of a new country that's going to be an Amazon type of country. And Jeff Bezos and those people are going to be thought of as our founding, I hate to say our founding fathers and sound exclusionary, but just to use that term, right? Our founding fathers are going to be displaced. George Washington won't even be a relic. He'll be forgotten. And instead, it'll be, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk. Hopefully his stature will be a little bit higher. So I just think it's going to be a little bit different. And I did a Periscope with Paul Gottfried. And I said, I hope we have a monarch, right? And he said, we're not going to get a monarch. We don't want one. We want kind of, and I'm not good at this word, authoritarian, right? That's what he said we want. He said that would be better. Monarchs tend to crumble and they're very unstable. We need a good authoritarian, whatever, right? I'm not good at that word. And it's the lisp, so everything connects. He says we need someone like that to get everything together. So I think the new America I'm actually very excited about, as long as Biden doesn't mess up Space Force. And how you feel about the Middle East policies, I feel about Space Force. And I've got to concede that I just took a look at the advisors that he uses. I shared it with a bunch of people, and they suggest dramatically cutting back on the funding of several things. So you know how I feel about that, man.
Right. That's unsurprising.
If we don't have Space Force, what do we have, right? When you think of everybody in the world knows who SpaceX is. But in any event, so now, Rising Serpent, thank you so much. And Dave, and thank you so much for asking this. Dave, can you tell people how they can get a signed copy of your book?
Sure. If you go to my website, it's scrolling down below so helpfully and beautifully. You will be able to you'll be able to get a signed copy of the book. Any day now, my copies arrive, so I will, as soon as I can quickly sign them, I'll get them out the door. As of now, I'm trying to figure out how to do international shipping. But hopefully I'll have that figured out soon. I will announce it on Twitter. Obviously, you can follow me for the latest on sort of at Dave Reaboi on Twitter, and also on the website when I'll talk about when more stuff is available as well. But even if you don't buy the book and you come to the website, click subscribe and get on the mailing list, because we are really living on borrowed time when it comes to Twitter and when it comes to some of these social media places. I've got an account set up, I've got a page set up at Locals now, where I'm going to be putting some of my my content, including playlists of cool music to listen to. So see me at Locals as well, but you can get a portal to all of it through my website, which is below.
Twitter is, I tell people that I'm not worried about that Twitter algorithms, because they leave us alone, right? At this point, we know what they are. We know what to say. We know what to say. I'm worried about the people algorithms. People have become kind of like this hostile algorithm that they're tuning themselves, and it's a very hostile algorithm they're creating for themselves. So I do see Twitter kind of changing, which is a shame, because the availability of information is just so remarkable. And I just see one more question, then I'm going to go back to your book for a second so we can close out. But tell me what this means. I love this type of like jargony type of things. I don't understand it. So, I think it's Modheshen. Can you help me out with the pronunciation of this, Dave? In fact, would you be kind enough to read the question?
I will. Do you ever think Obama era PSD, that's presidential, I think Presidential Study Directive 11, will ever be declassified? And the answer is no. We could not get it done under Donald Trump. And, it was just not a priority. It was one of the very, very frustrating things about it. I was in the White House, I guess early February of 2017. A few weeks after the inauguration was the first time I was there to do a meeting. And in fact, the meeting was some White House staff was convened in order to study designating the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization. And on a list of priorities that I had to the Trump people, frankly, shortly after election night, already in November of 2016, I said, you have to declassify PSD-11. PSD-11 was the blueprint, it's a classified directive, but it's said to be the blueprint that the Obama administration gave the thumbs up to sort of do the Arab Spring. So basically, it was their decision to support movements in the Middle East and revolutions in the Middle East against our allies there. We know very little about it beyond that because, again, it's classified. And I just wish that it would be out there because we really need clarity. I mean, right now we're still fighting. People are still fighting over what the Obama administration was doing in the Middle East, or what it thought it was doing in the Middle East, intentionally for 8 years. So some clarity on this would be much appreciated. You would think that they would, you would think that they would want to get out, to get this document out there if they really believed in it, if they thought the American people would support it. But I think the American people would be horrified if they knew what was in here. So of course they classified it. The chance of it ever seeing the light of day at this point, I just don't know. It was one of the major failures of the administration.
That was really informative. So thank you very much. And we're going to close up in just a second. So we're going to close up again with I'm going to bring your book on again, just so we can discuss it one last time. And I just want to be responsive to this. Seriously, really? And Gary Cooper. So true, so true. These people sold America, and you make such a strong point when I asked about pushing out our own pro-America propaganda, right? In the best sense of the word, because you know, it doesn't have to be a devious thing, but pro-America propaganda, which used to be the role of the VOA, Voice of America, right? That's what they used to do. So push pro-America propaganda into Qatar and into Qatar. And you're right. What would we be pushing out to them? It's a real big problem. Our movies are horrible. Our movies are horrible. They've gotten so bad. I think it was actually Mode who had said when we were tweeting back and forth that people are now watching Korean movies. I think that there's been a kind of an improvement in movies from Korea, and because you know the whole world is so anti-woke. So we're going to close up with your book, okay? And we're going to close up here because I think it's easier to get to here. So would you just remind everybody, will you be kind enough, because we've spoken so much, and I want to make sure that it's at the front of people's loads, right? Can you share with us again how people can buy the book and your obligation to sign it?
Sure. I'm going to sign it. If you go to my website, davereaboi.com, and the first link is for the book, Qatar's Shadow War. I will be happy to sign it and ship you a copy. If you're international, just hang on for a little bit. I am trying I'm trying to figure out international shipping right now.
Dave, you've been awesome. We spoke so much, and I'm gonna take a.
Thank you.
I try and find like a closing comment, right? So because that's the last thing so when I close this up, it's going to be the last thing ever imprinted. It's an amazing effect, but we're going to do something even better. We're going to close up with your book, Qatar Shadow War, the Islamist Emirate and its information operations in the United States. Everybody's been awesome. I want to thank everybody so much for joining us and allowing Dave and I to be the guest on your feed this evening.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Adam. You're always great. You have been, again, a fantastic host.
It's so much fun. Everybody had fun, and I think everyone's going to walk away from this so much more informed because everybody was in a classroom, right? But we all had fun, which is the best way to retain this information. So I'm going to press the button. When I press the button, everybody goes away, right? Because that kind of closes everything out. And I see so many thank you comments. So thank you to everybody as well for joining us. And when I press the button, everyone's going to go away, but you and me. Everyone's going to go away, and now we're going to stay backstage, and we're like, whatever. Okay, so now I'm going to press the button. I want to thank everybody so much, and have a wonderful night.
Good night.
Now press it.